The 9/11 truth movement is dead, and we have killed it. Hello everybody, my name is Luke Marshall here with PsyOps, and those are the words which I open my new article with. The article is up on Substack currently. I am going to link it in the description below. I encourage all of you guys to go check it out, but I think the melodrama is warranted because after more than a quarter century after 9/11, we have yet to see any sense of 9/11 justice take place. This is after countless dead in the war on terror, trillions of dollars wasted in this war on terror, and the building of a total domestic surveillance dragnet around us all. And this was something that I was beginning to think about more after the publication of my previous article, Epstein Was a 9/11 Job, which was republished on the UNS Review. There was a lot of positive feedback both there on the Substack, on the YouTube channel, where I also did a documentary version of the article. And while there was a lot of positive feedback, there was also some criticism. And in addition to criticism, there was also just a lot of people putting forward their own theories as to 9/11, or wondering why I did not mention their own specific pet theories when it comes to the subject of 9/11 truth. And this was something that was a little bit disappointing to me because the subject of my article, Epstein Was a 9/11 Job, was of course about connections of people in Epstein's circle to the events of September 11th, 2001, such as the fact that the current Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, who is an Epstein associate, was absent from his offices in the World Trade Center on 9/11, and he got office space in the World Trade Center for Sarah Ferguson, another Epstein associate who was married for a period of time to Prince Andrew, who of course was another Epstein associate, and she also just happened to be absent from the World Trade Center where she had a business meeting scheduled for the day. And instead of people talking about stuff like that, the things which were the focus of the article, there was lots of talk about people's own personal theories. And as somebody who is a veteran, or whatever you want to call it, of the conspiracy theory community, I am by no means unfamiliar with the fact that, topics like mini-nukes, directed energy weapons, no planes theory, that these have always been a part of the 9/11 truth community. While I knew that these had always been a part of the 9/11 truth community, I guess I just did not realize the level of disagreement and dysfunction that existed, that you couldn't even talk about some of the material connections and the financial trail and some of these other issues related to 9/11 without getting into discussions of fringe physics and exotic weaponry. And from my own personal perspective, these have never really been the parts of 9/11 that are interesting to me. I have never been as interested in things like that as I had been in things like the insider trading, or the fact that Israeli spy rings were operating on US soil around the time of 9/11 and that they likely had foreknowledge, or the tenants inside the World Trade Center building who had the means and the motive to do the 9/11 attacks. Discussions about how the buildings fell always seemed to me as if it was only good insofar as it was a way to get people's foot in the door of 9/11 truth and to get them to these bigger subjects. I feel this way in relation to other conspiracy theories such as the JFK assassination, where I don't really find conversations about where exactly the shooters were, whether the shots came from the overpass or the grassy knoll or the storm drain on Elm Street to be of primary importance. But I am more interested in people like James Angleton, who was the CIA liaison to Israel and one of the main people at the CIA during the time, and who have all these strange connections in relation to the Kennedy assassination. I'd rather put my focus into looking into somebody like him rather into talks about, bullet trajectory and where the shooters may have been positioned, which can function in large part as a distraction from the real important issues. However, there is another facet of these types of theories which is important to address, and that is the fact that some of these theories are by design meant to get your attention away from what is important, from looking at the people and the material facts on the ground, to go away from the financial trail or whatever it is, and to steer your attention into these discussions of fringe physics and exotic weaponry. And so today I'm going to make the perhaps unwise decision to talk about some of these theories which have, kind of served, in my opinion, as a distraction from what is truly important on 9/11, give my opinion as to what is wrong with some of these theories and why they don't work in actuality, and try to provide some counter evidence to it, so that way we can begin to shift our focus back to what actually matters when it comes to 9/11 truth. And not only am I going to counter some of these theories, but in the case of one of these theories, I'm going to show you that one of its main proponents, in fact, some of the initial main proponents, were people connected to intelligence agencies like the CIA, MI5, and even an official inside the Bush administration, and that these were the first people to promote the theory following the 9/11 attacks. And before wrapping up this introduction, the last thing I want to say is that if you do believe in one of these theories and you think that my analysis is wrong, I still hope that we can agree that looking at the intelligence agencies and the people who are connected to the events of 9/11, regardless of what you thought brought down the towers, is of primary importance, and that we need to be able to find a way to come together despite our differences and not endlessly debate these things. And perhaps the way that I'm going about it, by even addressing it, is the wrong way to go about it, given my point of view, but hopefully it'll be a way to start some conversation and it'll be of interest to everybody. So stick around and hopefully you guys enjoy it.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
Alright, so the first theory on the docket is mini-nukes, or nuclear weapons being used to bring down the World Trade Center buildings. And I first heard this theory years back from a guy named Jim Fetzer. Never been a huge fan of him personally, but when I was doing research for this article, I saw that somebody who I am a very big fan of their book, Black 9/11, Money, Motive, and Technology, Mark Gaffney, had written 2 articles on Un's Review, where my last article was republished, promoting this theory that some kind of nuclear devices had been used to bring down the World Trade Center buildings. And I thought, let's kind of revisit this theory, and I need to actually kind of give it a more critical thought, because when I'd seen Fetzer and some other people, put forward the theory, I wasn't really convinced. I didn't find it very persuasive. But given my respect for Gaffney and Black 9/11, which some of the material which is covered in Black 9/11 will be featured in the next portion of this 2-part series, I thought, I need to check it out. And so I'm going to be I'm really going to be addressing Gaffney's 2 articles, the demolition of the World Trade Center, and the other article is called, Did the Plowshare Program Set the Stage for Nuclear Terrorism on September 11th? And those articles can be found on the Un's Review. And if you want links to everything which I mentioned, those 2 articles, anything else, go check out the Substack in the description. In the article, there is going to be links for everything. But anyways, let's start getting into some of Gaffney's claims and looking into this theory of nuclear weapons being used to bring down the towers. In his article, Gaffney introduces us to the character of U.S. nuclear weapons designer Theodore Taylor, who designed the smallest nuclear weapon ever fielded, the Davy Crockett. Gaffney refers to an interview with Taylor where the question was posed to him how much fissile material was needed to bring down the Twin Towers. Gaffney writes, Taylor went on record that about 6 grams of fissile material would be sufficient to take down each tower. That's 0.2 ounces of bomb-grade material per tower, the mass equivalent of 1 to 2 sticks of chewing gum, or, in TNT equivalents, 0.1 kiloton. Gaffney then lays out his argument that the level of fallout from this small of an explosion spread across the entirety of the World Trade Center debris would have been negligible. However, this portion of his argument is unnecessary to address because no such weapon has ever or could ever exist. For a nuclear weapon to be functional, it must reach criticality, the physical threshold where the minimum amount of fissile material as well as the geometry and environment of its containment enable a sustained nuclear chain reaction. There is no escaping this reality. So the question is, how small of a nuke has been made and what is theoretically possible? As previously stated, Taylor designed the Davy Crockett, the smallest nuclear weapon ever fielded. The Crockett used a W-54 nuclear warhead, the smallest variety of nuke ever made. The Crockett and the Falcon warhead version of the W-54 came in weighing just under 51 pounds. In order to get the weapon so small, Taylor reduced the amount of fissile material, in this case plutonium-239, needed to reach criticality by altering the environment in which the fissile material was kept. The optimum shape for achieving critical mass, the amount of fissile material needed for a self-sustaining nuclear reaction, is a sphere. In nuclear physics, Baer sphere critical mass is used as a measurement. The Baer sphere critical mass of plutonium-239 is 10 kilograms or 22 pounds. W-54s used only 4 to 5 kilograms, 8.8 pounds to 11 pounds of fissile material. Neutron reflection and various other techniques were used to achieve this reduction of fissile material needed. Gaffney goes on to say regarding his 0.2 ounces of bomb-grade material per tower and its 0.1 kiloton TNT equivalent, that even if it were a larger device more along the lines of 0.3 to 0.4 kilotons, making the total fissile material for both towers being 30 to 40 grams, that this amount of radiation spread out across the World Trade Center debris would be negligible. Gaffney fails to acknowledge that the smallest nuke ever made, something that pushes what many consider the theoretical limit of how small a nuke can get, has 4 to 5 kilograms of fissile material. 4 kilograms is 100 times larger than 40 grams. As stated, the W-54 used 4 to 5 kilograms of plutonium-239 and complex implosion devices to even make this operable. These hypothetical World Trade Center nukes are anywhere from 705 times smaller than any known nuke, if you use the 0.2 ounces of bomb-grade material metric, to 100 times smaller. This strains credulity. An article published in the New Yorker titled "The Curve of Binding Energy" states that while Ted Taylor was looking at a sliver of uranium-235, he mused, if 10% of this were fissioned, it would be enough to knock down the World Trade Center. Immediately preceding this musing of Taylor, the author John McPhee wrote, "It is theoretically possible to make a very destructive bomb with nuclear material the size of a pea, but that is beyond the practical capability of even the man of extraordinary skill in the art." Taylor, who later in life became a fierce opponent of nuclear weaponry, was making a statement about the danger of fissile materials because of the energy potential they possess. However, as McPhee points out, this is beyond the skill of the most extraordinarily skilled in the art. Luckily for us, Taylor would not only share the amount of fissile material possessing enough energy to bring down the World Trade Center buildings, but he would also speculate how small of a nuke he thought could possibly be built. Taylor would know considering his expertise in the field of small nuclear weaponry. Taylor said that a nuke with a 4.1-inch diameter shell with a mass of 19 kilograms or 42 pounds is theoretically possible. This would be more comparable to a W-54, which held 4 to 5 kilograms of plutonium-239, rather than some kind of device holding 0.2 ounces of fissile material. Small nukes like the W-54 carried a number of problems. The main problem that damages the theory of mini-nukes being used to demolish the World Trade Center buildings is the wide amount of variability in explosive yield. The explosive yield of the W-54 was anywhere between 10 and 1,000 tons of TNT. So let's take a step back from all of this technical jargon and scientific talk, and let's do a little bit of comparison. So 10 tons equivalent of TNT, that would be like the equivalent of 4 Murrah building bombings, with the explosive yield of the Murrah building being about 2.5 tons equivalent of TNT. Now, let's watch this video of the Beirut explosion, which is 1.1 kiloton, so close to 1,000 tons, just a little bit bigger, to get an idea of the variability and what a small nuclear device's explosive yield, discrepancy is.
Whoa!
And so now we need to ask ourselves, would the perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks, would they really take this tactical liability of using some kind of nuclear device that on the one hand could maybe accomplish their goals with the size of 4 OKC bombings at one time happening, but on the other hand could absolutely level the whole entire block? This seems like a tactical nightmare, a total liability, and I think just completely rules out the likelihood that this kind of exotic weaponry would be deployed by the 9/11 perpetrators. Now, Gaffney's likely rebuttal would be that he is not suggesting anywhere near this amount of fissile material, anywhere near this magnitude of a bomb, but that doesn't really matter because, as we have shown, 0.2 ounces of fissile material, that is just completely fiction. That does not exist. So that does not serve as an actual rebuttal to the claim. The level of nuke that exists on the small end, this is the reality we are talking about. This is the variability in explosive yield. In one of Gaffney's 2 articles, he admits that conventional explosives, demolition devices could have been used to bring down the World Trade Center buildings. And I think that given this, even by Gaffney's own admission, combined with the discrepancy in explosive yield and the fact that nukes with the amount of fissile material that Gaffney is suggesting might have been used, that they don't exist, that we can use Occam's razor and say that it was most likely conventional explosives of some kind, like maybe nanothermite or thermate, which were used to probably bring down the towers. Okay, so now let's look into the Plowshare program, which Gaffney uses kind of as the historical basis for how this type of technology he suggests might have been used to bring down the World Trade Center buildings could exist, and this is where it would have come from.
To perform a multitude of peaceful tasks for the betterment of mankind, man is exploring a source of enormous, potentially useful energy: the nuclear explosion. He sees the potentials and he sees the problems. To investigate both and to develop the technology that will turn potentials into realities, the United States is conducting, for the benefit of all nations, a program it calls Plowshare.
During the latter half of the 50s, researchers from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory began conducting research into the possible use of nuclear explosions for peaceful purposes. The idea was that nuclear explosives could be used in projects that necessitated removal of large amounts of earth, such as the breaking of rock for excavation. 2 months prior to Plowshare's start, Pascal A, a bomb the equivalent of 55 tons of TNT, was detonated 500 feet underground. Bob Campbell, one of the Los Alamos test directors, said, "There was about 1/10 of the radiation on the ground around there," or as Gaffney phrases it, a 90% reduction in fallout. A move towards the underground testing of nuclear explosives had begun during the period of time for a variety of reasons, chief among them being the reduction of radiological fallout. The Plowshares program was a natural outgrowth of the incredible reduction in radiation achieved during the detonation of Pascal A. The Atomic Energy Council formed Project Plowshare in 1957, and in September of that year, the Rainier shot at the Nevada test site was considered a success by the AEC. The 1.7 kiloton detonation was contained underground, preventing the escape of radiation. Plowshares was off to an explosive start. An international moratorium on nuclear weapons testing stalled the Plowshare program from 1958 until September of 1961 with Project Gnome. The idea was to see if a deep underground nuclear detonation could create heat to produce steam that could be used to generate electricity. Gnome was placed 1,184 feet deep in an underground tunnel that was supposed to seal upon detonation. 2 to 3 minutes after the 3.1 kiloton detonation, smoke and steam rose from the tunnel. The entrance had failed to seal. Off-site contamination took place, but was alleged to have decayed quickly. However, the Atomic Energy Council said that exposure to on-site radiation was higher than expected. The sedan test conducted under the Plowshare's program in 1962 contaminated more U.S. residents than any other nuclear test in history. More than 13 million Americans were exposed to radioactive dust particles released into the atmosphere. The explosive was lowered into a shaft 636 feet deep at Area 10 of the Nevada National Security Site. The goal of the test was to test the efficacy of nukes in the fields of mining and cratering. A 104 kiloton blast followed the detonation of the thermonuclear device, the largest man-made crater in history, and a 12,000-foot radioactive dust cloud that carried radioactive detritus from Nevada as far as Iowa and South Dakota ensued. In Utah, radioiodine began appearing in milk samples due to Plowshare's blunder. Gaffney in his article quotes Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bombs, glowing self-appraisal of his pet project Plowshares before a congressional committee, in which Teller said, "I can say, not with certainty, but with quite a bit of hope, that we can make nuclear explosives for peaceful purposes so clean that the worry about radiation may disappear completely." However, Gaffney fails to mention what Teller had to say regarding growing public concern about Plowshares in 1963, following the Sedan debacle, when he said, "The discussion about fallout has resulted in exaggerated and unwarranted fears, so that even small quantities of radioactivity, which are themselves not harmful, are viewed with alarm." In 1967, the Plowshares program would begin their foray into nuclear fracking. The first attempt, titled Project Gas Buggy, took place in New Mexico, involving the equivalent of 29 kilotons of TNT, detonating 4,200 feet underground, successfully breaking rock and stimulating gas production. However, the gas was unusable due to radioactive contamination. Another attempt took place alongside the Colorado River in 1969. Project Rulian would only yield $1.5 million despite the project's $11 million cost. The gas still contained radioactive byproducts. After 4 years, one last effort was made in Colorado, that being Project Rio Blanco. The 33 kiloton blast once again resulted in contamination. This time, that contamination occurred in the form of strontium-90, which can cause cancer in bones and bone marrow. As reported by the People's Atlas of Nuclear Colorado, the Rulian explosion was also accompanied by significant surface venting of irradiated smoke, dirt, and debris breaking through the surface of the mountain and escaping into the atmosphere, even though the underground blast was detonated 8,400 feet below ground surface. It is not technically possible to clean up radionuclides from deep underground contamination or deep soil or water contamination. These sites will never be free of long-lasting radionuclides. They will remain a radiological hazard, particularly for mining operations, during earthquake events, or during other unforeseen occurrences. The radionuclides of concern at both test sites are tritium, krypton-85, and carbine-14. Carbine-14 is present primarily when attached to methane molecules. All three radionuclides are highly mobile in gas and water, and they are readily absorbed into the bloodstream, potentially causing cancer and other radio illnesses, particularly to unborn fetuses, children, and women. Throughout his second article, Gaffney argues that the Plowshare scientists found methods of greatly reducing radiation. Gaffney cites in his article a paper by Richard Lessler entitled Reduction of Radioactivity Produced by Nuclear Explosives. Gaffney uses this paper to say, Plowshare scientists had successfully reduced both neutron activation and fission decay products by 99%. This is misleading. The paper by Lessler is a design study using a computational algorithm known as the Monte Carlo method to estimate the mathematical outcome of the reduction of neutron escape with boron shielding. It also hypothesizes that both a reduction in the size of the fission trigger and swapping certain materials and devices could achieve a large reduction in radioactivity. The paper never states anything about a 99% reduction. I presume Gaffney arrived at this number from the estimated differences from the real-life observed fallout from the Sedan bombing and the hypothetical projected performance of a hypothetical clean nuke proposed by Lessler. In fact, it was the total, unmitigated disaster that was the Sedan test, which prompted the Plowshares program to delve deeper into minimizing radioactivity. That's not to say that the program didn't make significant steps in the direction of limiting radioactivity. However, even Lessler prefaces his paper with, although it is theoretically possible to have no radioactivity produced by nuclear explosives, this goal has not been achieved. Lessler also states in his paper, also, the assumptions used as they relate to to emplacement techniques, neutron shielding, scavenging, and significant nuclides released to the environment do not necessarily represent the current state of the art. It stands to reason that if the Plowshare program had found a way to reduce radiation from nuclear bombs by 99%, that the program would have been a success, despite public opposition. The reality of the Plowshare program's failure is not just a lack of commercial viability and cost inefficiency, as Gaffney leads readers to believe. The Plowshare's program is considered by almost everyone to be an unmitigated failure. The kind of weaponry theorized to have been used in the World Trade Center by Gaffney has no historical basis, and all facts point in the direction of these kinds of weapons being a physical impossibility. Nuclear weapons can only be scaled down so much. Nothing approaching the minuscule amounts of fissile material that Gaffney suggests is physically possible. Scientists at Gaffney cites, like Theodore Taylor and Richard Lessler, are misrepresented. In summary, Gaffney's theoretical weapon used to demolish the World Trade Center seems theoretical at best and impossible at worst. Gaffney's telling of the Plowshare's program's history exaggerates minor accomplishments and omits the many massive setbacks the program faced. Alright, now let's talk about directed energy weapons, which is kind of like the sci-fi theory of what brought the towers down. It's what you think about in between thinking about Nikola Tesla, listening to Tool, sacred geometry, the Fibonacci sequence. Anyways, let's get into it. And you can't really talk about directed energy weapons without talking about Dr. Judy Wood, the primary proponent of directed energy weapons theory. She wrote the book Where Did the Towers Go? She holds a PhD and has a background in civil engineering, material engineering, structural engineering. Anyways, she has some academic titles behind her. She has amassed millions of views across all of her different interviews and speeches, which have been recorded and uploaded. Within the past year, she's been on Patrick Bet-David's show, which garnered her a bunch of attention, with that being one of the most 60 popular podcasts, at least according to the Spotify charts. Anyways, let's take a look at Dr. Judy Wood and her theory of directed energy weapons. But first, let's take a look at some clips from an interview that was done with Dr. Judy Wood and another PhD, this time PhD physicist Gregory Jenkins, who poses some interesting questions that, in my opinion, Dr. Judy Wood does not have sufficient answers for.
You have, come up with some ideas regarding space-based weapons and the demolition of the World Trade Center towers. And I was wondering if you could give like an overview of the proposed types of weapons that could be used for such a thing.
We haven't really got into listing them yet, just energy weapons.
I mean, no matter what the beam that is used in the situation will involve, I guess the term you use is dustification of metal, or I guess another way you could get rid of it.
We're trying to invent a new word.
Yeah, mine as well, right?
Poof, you know?
Yeah, or the vaporization of the metal in the towers, one or the other. Have you done any energy calculations at all to get a scale for what is involved for doing that?
But we don't need to get distracted by those values. If you look at the pictures and look at the scrap pile when it's all done with, is there any question that the building was pulverized?
Well, I do have some questions, but I've come up with an energy scale for the problem. If you use, like, say, a photon beam, a laser beam of some kind, you run into some problems, and namely
the
amount of energy required to evaporate the steel in the towers is...
Wait, you're specifying evaporation.
Sure.
What about dustification? Is that what we're talking about?
You want to talk about dustification?
That's pulverizing the building, just turning turning the building contents into nanodust, we'll call it.
Okay.
Just pulverizing it. Just
Right now, I don't know, maybe, has this been done in the laboratory? Has anything been done that would turn steel into dust? Mm-hmm. What?
Various types of energy.
What kind?
Beams,
what kind of
well,
energy?
let's see. You put something in your microwave oven and leave it on there extra long and see what happens to it.
That's food.
Now, the fact that she can't point to having done any energy calculations or knows how much energy it would take to dustify steel, or the fact that she can't point to the existence of any kind of weapon or even can throw out some kind of hypothesis as to the type of weapon which would be capable of doing such a thing that she claims is done is, in my mind, kind of enough to debunk directed energy weapons theory. But let's get into some of the more detailed things debunking Dr. Judy Wood. One of the primary arguments of the directed energy weapon camp is that vast amounts of World Trade Center debris is missing. Dr. Gregory Jenkins, in his 31-page analysis of Judy Wood's theory, dismantles this notion. Wood often compares the amount of debris at ground zero to the rubble left after the demolition of the Seattle Kingdome Stadium. Jenkins explains why the two are not comparable. The empty space by volume of a sports stadium will not be similar to that of a skyscraper. Instead of using the King's Dome as a structural model for comparison, Jenkins uses World Trade Center 7 as his guide to see if there is in fact missing debris from the Twin Towers. The reason he uses World Trade Center 7 as his guide is due to the fact that no buildings as massive as the Twin Towers had ever collapsed. Jenkins proceeds to calculate the volumetric compression, the reduction of an object's material volume, of the Twin Towers after calculating roughly the size of the rubble pile World Trade Center 7 left in its wake. After calculating the volumetric compression, the missing debris disappears. But sophisticated math equations aren't required to arrive at this conclusion. Of the 200,000 tons of structural steel used to construct the World Trade Center complex, 168,000 tons of steel was salvaged after the attacks. This is just some of the 1.8 million tons of rubble left at ground zero. One can clearly see tons of rubble and photographs of ground zero. This is not to mention all of the rubble which was quickly hauled off as part of the criminal destruction of evidence, which I discussed in my previous article and which I also discussed in my previous video. So I'm going to pose the question to the directed energy weapons hypothesis crowd: where is this missing rubble? The death knell for the directed energy weapons hypothesis is the absurd amount of energy that would be required to dustify steel. Dr. Jenkins in his paper calculates the energy that would be required to evaporate or dustify the steel in the upper 110 floors of one of the World Trade Center buildings. The amount of energy needed to raise the temperature of steel from room temperature to the boiling point to gas would require 5 times the power output of Earth. When Jenkins takes into account losses from scattering and absorption in the atmosphere and other atmospheric inefficiencies, the power required swells to at least thousands of Earths worth of power. Jenkins also points out that for a variety of reasons, the type of directed energy weapons used could not be a photon beam. The other variety of directed energy weapons are particle beams. Due to steel's high reflectivity, Jenkins states that over 99% of incoming photons would have been reflected off of the steel. People who are mostly water would have been vaporized. Others would have suffered severe burns. The facades of buildings would have cracked, tar in the streets would have melted. Directed energy weapons proponents like Wood will cite the charred cars outside the World Trade Center buildings as proof of their theory. However, this ignores the fact that thermate reaches temperatures above steel's melting point, the existence of localized hotspots, and that cars could have been struck by debris leaking combustible fluids. As Jenkins points out, a burning piece of paper or a piece of hot metal would be sufficient for ignition of such combustible fluids. Mythical energy weapons are by no means needed to explain these charred vehicles. Now, more could be said about the directed energy weapons hypothesis, but if you want a more detailed breakdown of all of that, I just suggest that you go check out the Gregory Jenkins essay, which is going to be linked in the Substack article, which is in the description below. But to get back to the thesis of this video, theories like the directed energy weapons hypothesis distract us from what really matters when it comes to 9/11, which is the principal players, who was involved, who had the means, who had the motive, who actually did 9/11. And if we are talking about hypothetical, fringe, exotic weaponry, we are ignoring what is actually important when it comes to 9/11. And theories like this also poison the well, and it makes us look like lunatics to the outside world and people who don't already subscribe to the directed energy weapons hypothesis. Finally, the last theory that I'm going to address, not that there aren't more that I could address, but that is going to be no planes theory, which surprisingly enough, it's not necessarily what I would have guessed, but it is the theory that I got the most comments to look into in regards to my previous article, Epstein was, or 9/11 was an Epstein job, excuse me. Anyhow, some of the earliest proponents of this theory were David Shaler, a former MI5 employee. There is Morgan Reynolds, a Bush administration official, and the person who I first heard no planes theory from was John Lear, a former CIA asset. And let's dig a little bit into his own history and ask the question to ourselves, is John Lear a good faith actor, or could he potentially be a CIA asset who was used as a form of controlled opposition, who was serving the purpose of poisoning the well and spreading disinformation in the 9/11 truth community and the conspiracy parapolitical community at large. John Lear was the son of Learjet magnate Bill Lear. Due to their tense relationship, the two became estranged, with Bill Lear excluding John from his will. More importantly, John Lear was a CIA pilot from 1967 until 1982, flying secret missions in Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and Africa. Lear was a pilot for the CIA's covertly owned and controlled Air America during the Vietnam War. Air America was likely involved in drug trafficking out of Laos, or at the very least turned a blind eye to the Laotian military's involvement in the international drug trade. Given the CIA's long and sordid history in relation to the drug trade as a source of black budget funds and a means of social control, one has to wonder what Lear's work as an asset of the agency entailed. Shortly after his stint flying CIA planes, Lear would make his way into the conspiracy world, appearing on George Knapp's television show.
We have this concept of the people from other planets as little green men. Are they green from what you know? Are they all the same, or we got different kinds of them?
George, there's at least 70 different species, and probably more. But yes, as odd as it sounds, there are little green men. That's not...
Lear became a prominent voice in the UFO community, with lurid tales of alien abductions, alien implants, and alien-human hybrids. Lear befriended Bill Cooper, a naval intelligence officer turned conspiracy theorist. Cooper brought into the UFO community the sort of right populist-type conspiracism that served as the proto-MAGA-type conspiracies one finds today in subcultures like QAnon and in figures like Alex Jones. Cooper would later turn on Lear, accusing him of being a CIA plant. Cooper came to believe that the government targeted him with disinformation concerning aliens to distract him from the small cabal of elites foisting their New World Order agenda on an unwitting populace. Bill Cooper's intuition regarding his former drinking buddy Lear may not have been too far off the mark. In 1989, Lear hosted the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, annual convention in Las Vegas, Nevada. Despite controversy amongst others involved with MUFON, Lear scheduled a number of speakers who were supposed to independently verify Paul Bennewitz's story of discovering an underground base ran by the US government in conjunction with extraterrestrials. The main speaker at the conference, Bill Moore, revealed to the attendees gathered at the MUFON event that he was an intelligence asset involved in a disinformation campaign targeting Bennewitz along with Air Force Sergeant Richard C. Doty. One of the goals of this intelligence operation, according to Moore, was to disseminate information and study how it passed from person to person to better understand information channels.
let's take one step at a time. You're looking at Richard Doty, the professional disinformer, trained to lie.
I'm Richard Doty. There's probably about 80% of false information being presented, about 20% of factual information. Unfortunately, the UFO community doesn't know which is which.
And that's your job to keep it that way?
That was my job before. I'm a private citizen now, but back in the early 80s, it was my job to confuse the UFO community.
The main reason that we in the UFO field recognize the name Richard Doty is that a man named Paul Benowitz, a self-made man, a very successful businessman, was systematically driven insane, wound up in an insane asylum, under treatment for a long time, lost his business, had to turn it over to his family, and was destroyed by the efforts of Richard Doty.
Lear's role in the promotion of Paul Benowitz, a man systematically broken by psychological warfare and undercover agents, should be a cause for concern in relation to the role he played in the 9/11 Truth movement. Interestingly, Lear signed an affidavit and provided expert testimony in relation to a lawsuit that former Bush administration official Morgan Reynolds brought against contractors in the NIST 9/11 investigation. Dr. Judy Wood was involved in similar lawsuits. So what are we to make of that? That some of the most prominent and some of the earliest proponents of no plane theory were a former MI5 agent, a former Bush administration official, and a CIA agent who flew planes for Air America out of Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War when there was likely drug trafficking taking place at the behest of the CIA, and who would immediately, pretty much after his career flying planes for the CIA, go into the conspiracy world where he would push outlandish theories, promote Paul Benowitz, be accused by Bill Cooper, who he was a close friend and drinking buddy of being a CIA plant, and would be involved with other disinformation agents at this MUFON conference in Nevada, with Paul Benowitz being promoted. And, Paul Benowitz would ultimately be institutionalized for a period after he had his mind fractured by undercover agents. But, I'm sure that, John Lear is saying that there were no planes and that it was, missiles disguised by holograms, cloaked by holograms. I'm sure that can't be poisoning the well or anything like that. But let's not just, dismiss all of this out of hand. Let's actually address some of the arguments made by no planes proponents and then wrap up this video before we go into the second part, which will be up in the next week or so. Now, there are a variety of different no planes theories, but from what I have gathered, there are 3 core arguments shared across all no planes theories, and these are commonly used in support of their claims. These 3 arguments are that the damage observed in the Twin Towers could not have been caused by the planes, and the aluminum in the planes could not have caused the damage. The second argument being that the planes did not leave large intact wreckage behind, and that this is something that we would have observed in the rubble and the debris if they were to have been planes in the attacks. And the third being that the impact holes in the Twin Towers and the Pentagon are not large enough to accommodate the planes alleged to have been used in the attacks. So let's take these arguments apart one by one. No planes theorists ask how hollow aluminum tubes were capable of penetrating the steel of the North and South Tower. This ignores the physics of kinetic energy. The planes were not merely hollow aluminum tubes, they contained heavy non-aluminum equipment, landing gear, engines, and massive kill beams. These delivered the primary force of the impact. The planes were traveling at incredible speeds of 494 miles an hour and 586 miles an hour. The wings were filled with thousands of gallons of jet fuel. Kinetic energy, the energy an object possesses possesses due to its motion can cause lightweight objects to pass through heavier objects due to speed. An object traveling at fast speeds can go through stronger material despite being constructed of a weaker material. We can see numerous examples of this, of how kinetic energy can send weaker materials through stronger materials, such as on YouTube you can watch videos of a pumpkin going through a van, a ping pong ball traveling through a paddle, or water cutting through aluminum. It should also be noted that the wings and fuselage didn't cut into the building like a knife through butter, rather they went through the exterior facade before shredding, decelerating, and fragmenting. Now let's address another one of the primary concerns of no planes theorists, that being that the impact holes in the buildings were not large enough to accommodate the alleged planes. Let's start by looking at the hole in the Pentagon, which has been an intense subject of debate in the 9/11 truth communities for years, even outside no planes theorists. In fact, probably more 9/11 truthers believe that it was not a Boeing 757 that struck the Pentagon than 9/11 truthers who do believe it to have been a Boeing 757. For a comprehensive demonstration of the Pentagon impact hole matching that of a Boeing 757, I encourage you guys to go check out the article by ISGP Studies, which is linked in the Substack, but to avoid reiterating the entirety of that article, I will rely upon other evidence aside from the photographic analysis conducted by ISGP. Proponents of the theory that no plane struck the Pentagon revert to the common argument across all the various no planes theories that there was a lack of debris found. This is despite the fact that multiple eyewitnesses described airplane debris which they saw. Lieutenant Colonel Tom McLean said, "I saw the remains of the engines in the north parking lot of the Pentagon, as well as melted aluminum and other debris left from the aircraft." The Army Deputy Chief of Public Affairs, Charles H. Crone, said, "One of the aircraft's engines somehow ricocheted out of the building and arched into the Pentagon's mall parking area between the main building and the new loading dock facility." Other witnesses described seeing pieces of aircraft skin falling from the sky, as well as burning fiberglass insulation drifting down towards the highway near the Pentagon. Pieces of engine and wheels were found at the crash site of the Pentagon, with the photographed debris matching that of a 757. These photos are lifted from the previously mentioned ISGP Studies article, with helpful annotations accompanying each image. While from the onset the damage done to the Pentagon may not seem extensive enough for Flight 77 to have been the instrument used in the attack, a closer examination shows that a Boeing 757-223 is more than capable of this. In fact, alternative explanations fail to have the explanatory power that it was Flight 77 which hit the Pentagon. Eyewitness testimony and debris which matches that of a Boeing 757 further corroborates this. None of this is to say that there are no unanswered questions about the attacks on the Pentagon. How did Hani Hanjour, who is alleged to have flown Flight 77, accomplish a 270 to 330 degree descending turn, 8,000 feet, traveling at 530 miles an hour when he couldn't even handle flying a single engine Cessna? Then Hanjour just so happened to strike the Pentagon in the budget analyst's office, an area that had previously undergone restoration and was stronger than other areas of the building. This was the day after Donald Rumsfeld announced $2.3 trillion the Pentagon couldn't account for. Without belaboring the point, the impact holes on the North and South Tower are not too small to have been a Boeing 767. In fact, the profile of the impact zones matched that of a 67 on both towers. The steel columns on the outermost 20 feet of each wing were undamaged on the North Tower, which shouldn't be a surprise to no planes theorists who harp on how much stronger steel is than aluminum. The below photo shows a 767 with a wingspan of 155 feet superimposed on the North Tower's impact hole, which was 207 feet in width. Jim Hoffman, from whom I took the above graphic, provides us with the below graphic and its following annotation in relation to the South Tower's area of impact. This photograph shows the South Tower's impact gash about 40 seconds after the collision of Flight 175. The profile of a 767, including both the wings and tail, is visible in the imprint. The easiest way to demonstrate the sheer implausibility that no planes were used in the attacks is the number of eyewitnesses who claim to have seen a plane fly into the buildings. In the case of the Pentagon, hundreds, if not thousands of people witnessed the event due to a traffic jam on the west side of the building. An analysis of different eyewitness reports concerning the plane crashing into the Pentagon show that of 89 people who saw an object hit the Pentagon, 45 described seeing a plane while using words like airliner. Dozens said they specifically saw an American Airlines jet. Witnesses of the plane that struck the Pentagon also seem to agree on details such as the plane banking to the left and hitting light post. One can read a lengthy collection of these quotes on the ISGP Studies website. The attacks on the World Trade Center buildings took place during morning rush hour in Manhattan, meaning that hundreds, if not thousands in traffic on the street or in adjacent buildings saw the plane strike the buildings. That's not to mention all the video evidence of planes striking the buildings, which I know that people will say that those are CGI or faked or whatever, but one does not have to look hard to find eyewitness testimony of people who claim to have seen planes strike the North and the South Towers. While I could address other arguments by no planes theorist, I don't think that I need to, given all of the eyewitness testimony, which I think in and of itself kind of debunks it, and some of the other stuff that I have mentioned. And I encourage everybody to go check out some of the resources in the Substack article, which go into more depth on some of these specific issues. And I also don't think that I need to address whether or not the military had the technology that was capable of cloaking drones and holograms like John Lear says, or whether in the early 2000s, if CGI was in the point where, you could convincingly fake, these, VHS home footage style videos of planes striking the World Trade Center buildings. I think that we have sufficiently covered it. And anyways, the point of this video is just to kind of address some of these arguments so that way we can reach the conclusion, which is regardless of if you agree with me or not on these specific theories, these theories can often serve as a distraction. And if we are not talking about who did 9/11 and why, and who had the means to do 9/11, we are doing the 9/11 truth movement a disservice. And all of this talk about logistics and what exactly brought down the towers, and all of the infighting about whether it was directed energy weapons, mini-nukes, thermite, it is what has brought us to this standstill and made us unable to get anywhere with the 9/11 truth movement. And a lot of these fringe theories also serve to poison the well and stuff like that. And you can probably gather that I am a proponent of some kind of thermite or thermate devices being used to bring down the towers via controlled demolition, which I'll address some of that in the next article. But more importantly, in the next article, we're going to get into the who had the means, the motive, the opportunity, and who likely did 9/11. And that is what is truly important if we are ever going to take 9/11 truth and turn it into 9/11 justice. So I hope that all of you guys will join me for that next article video. So go check out the Substack with all of the links and the sources, and it's got all of my other articles on there. Make sure that you subscribe here to the YouTube channel, give this video a like, check out all of the other videos, like, share, subscribe to the YouTube and the Substack for all of the future videos and stuff. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. In the next couple of weeks, or maybe even less, there's going to be a follow-up video and article. But until then, take care.